And now it's my pleasure to please welcome to the stage our state leaders, Paul Gosselin, Erik Ekdahl, Don Cameron. This session is moderated by Ashley Boren with Sustainable Conservation.
Is this on?
Yes.
Yeah, awesome. So, Graham, that was great. I really appreciated those reflections and some good provocative questions for us all to think about. I think we'll get to some of those today with this panel. I'm Ashley Boren. I'm the longtime CEO of Sustainable Conservation. We're a nonprofit dedicated to helping California thrive by uniting people to solve the toughest challenges facing our land, air, and water. And one of those challenges is definitely sustainable groundwater management. And we're proud to be active participants of the FloodMar network. So today we're honored to have 3 state leaders with us, all who have been working very hard to support FloodMar. And I'm going to do brief introductions. And so let me start with Paul. Paul is DWR's Deputy Director for Sustainable Groundwater Management, and he oversees the Sustainable Groundwater Management Office, known as SGMO, I believe, which includes statewide groundwater management activities and also the implementation of SGMA. Paul's got extensive experience in local groundwater management and environmental regulations and leadership. Prior to joining DWR in 2021, he served for 13 years as Butte County's Director of Water and Resource Conservation, where he led Butte County's drought response as chair of the Butte County Drought Task Force, while also leading sustainable groundwater management efforts through the implementation of SGMA. So he oversaw development of 3 groundwater sustainability plans and was administrator of 2 GSAs. And then prior to Butte County, Gosselin, or Paul, was Chief Deputy Director at the California Department of Pesticides Regulation, where he developed regulatory programs to protect surface and groundwater quality. So obviously bring a wealth of experience to your role. Erik Ekdahl is the State Water Resources Control Board's Division of Water Rights Deputy Director. And I think all of you know, Erik's division is responsible for establishing and maintaining a stable system of water rights in California. He's been with the state board since 2008 and has worked in various divisions and on many issues, including groundwater quality, urban water conservation efficiency, and SGMA. So also brings a wealth of experience. And then Don is with us today as the president of the State Board of Food and Agriculture. Don was appointed to the board by Governor Brown in 2014 and became the president of the board in 2018. And he has been reappointed twice by Governor Newsom. Yeah, I think so. Don's day job is as vice president and general manager of Terra Nova Ranch, located 25 miles southwest of Fresno. And Terra Nova farms about 6,000 acres, and it's a mix of conventional and organic annual and perennial crops. But Don is probably best known as the godfather of on-farm recharge, which is a title that I believe Kamyar gave him a number of years ago. He pioneered the idea of allowing floodwater to spread onto his fields for the explicit purpose of recharging groundwater and has had a lot of success. He's also hosted many researchers on his farm to help California better understand and promote the practice. So what we're going to do is I've got a few questions that I'm going to ask, and you're not supposed to be panelists. This is supposed to be a fishbowl. So the idea is that the idea is to try to have a conversation on some of these topics. So I'm going to ask a few questions, and then we'll open it up to all of you for questions. You've got sticky notes on your table, so if you've got a question, jot it down and put your hand in the air, and Megan will come get it, and then she'll bring them up to me, and I'll see if I can get to some of those. So let's start off just with a general question about the benefits of FloodMar. So from the perspective of your agency, what do you see as the benefits of FloodMar? And Paul, why don't we start with you?
Sure, thanks. And it's great to be here. Thanks for the invitation and looking for a nice, lively discussion on FloodMar and where we're going. A couple benefits, just thinking the obvious pressure that local agencies, GSAs are facing trying to balance the basin and move towards sustainability. I think it's it's kind of moved from the theoretical when they were producing plans now with, especially this past winter. And I think as implementation is really starting to take hold, it's become even a heightened need to have happen. And particularly not just for the end game on sustainability, but looking at the 500,000 million acres of ag land that may go out in the San Joaquin Valley through implementation of Sigma, maximizing what's available for recharge is going to be real important to minimize that amount of ag land going out of production, because it is vitally important to keep lands in production and food produced and everything. So this is going to be a good balance, I think, for trying to minimize the impact, which is going to be pretty severe, but otherwise doing nothing, it would be catastrophic.
Erik?
I agree entirely with Paul's overview. Would add some additional things from our agency's perspective. We are engaged in the Sigma process, and in fact, there's a meeting later today in Hanford to talk about a potential state board intervention for the first time. So the benefits of recharging basins helps reduce state board need to intervene, helps us get on that pathway towards sustainability. There's also a natural flood benefit too. And I think we'll talk more about that later on, but this year specifically, we saw executive order and then trailer bill language that specifically addressed reducing that flood risk in a way that maximizes recharge. That's a benefit on its own. That does tie into ecosystems too, not everywhere and maybe not to the degree in some places as others, but when you put more water into a basin, that water does eventually discharge and it can help support base flows. And I believe there's a number of flood projects specifically designed around that component. So there's multi-benefits, and board's a strong supporter of all of them.
Great. And Dawn?
So I want to qualify this because I'm a farmer and president of the Food and Ag Board. So I'm representing CDFA and my operation. So there's going to be mixed answers through here as we go. So I don't want to be held accountable for the CDFA's position. But with that said, as CDFA, we know that the benefits of AgMar not only help farmers, but they also help communities. They help the environmental situation. There's absolutely no question. It's part of the ag vision that California has put out, to provide resilient regenerative food systems for the state. And part of that is we have to have water available. And with AgMar and FloodMar, we know that we're helping prevent downstream damage and flooding, property damage, lives being saved, but we're also rebuilding the aquifer, and we're supporting agriculture, really long-term sustainable
Great. So obviously a lot of support from our state agencies for FloodMar. So, but we know that it's all not easy. So maybe we can talk about some of the barriers and what your agencies are doing to address those barriers. And let's see, I think I'll mix it up. Erik, I'll start with you.
So, full admission that my agency is viewed as one of those barriers in many circumstances. I maybe don't entirely agree, but I don't entirely disagree either. I mean, that is kind of our role. We are supposed to work and make sure that if there is water for diversion, so if there's water available, that it can be safely and appropriately diverted and stored or used for FloodMar and recharge purposes. The difficulty I think that we're finally seeing is our data management system, 100+ years of kind of laissez-faire water diversion reporting requirements, or maybe no requirements at all for a long time, catching up with a much tighter system that kind of demands more real-time accounting of water use and where it's going. It's a hard thing to kind of really support for people, right? Water use accounting is maybe not the most exciting topic in the world, but what we're really doing in our agency is doing a water availability analysis. Sometimes it's clear cut. When there's floods, we don't really need to do a water availability analysis. But if we look at the applications that have come into the board, a lot of them aren't asking for those peak floods. It's a broad season and it's a pretty broad range of diversion thresholds. And there is a lot of work involved in trying to figure out when is water available, when is it not, especially if that watershed is in the delta. It's extremely complicated. So there's that. The cost of a water right permit is also, I think, worth flagging. The water rights permitting staff is fee supported. So all of that work actually comes from water right fee payers. But it's also worth noting that only 55% of all water rights actually pay fees. About half don't. And that's a little bit of an inequity. The work that we're doing is actually to protect those more senior water rights to make sure that the new diversion is not taking water that they otherwise would rely on. So there are some just inherent structural issues. That's not something that's at the board's discretion. That's a legislative action. Legislative actions in water rights are difficult. So there are indeed challenges and indeed barriers. Data, water availability is, I think, one of the biggest ones from our agency's perspective.
So that was really a great layout of those barriers. Can you maybe just touch on some of the things your agency is doing to address those?
Yeah, we have discounted fees for certain types of permits, specifically the 180-day permits. We also have worked with the legislature over the last 5 years or so to create new temporary pathways. The idea being, let's use the temporary permits as a way to come into the door now or much more quickly, while at the same time the applicant works on their kind of permanent water right, which can take much longer. So those are ways that we're trying to incentivize and say, you know, come in, let's start the process now, because waiting another 5 or 10 years is just going to take even longer. We were very fortunate to receive a significant infusion of general fund dollars in the last 3 budget years to rebuild the state's water rights data system. And that process is actively underway, another year or two before it's fully rolled out. But this involves, digitizing 7 million documents. And I was going to show some photos earlier, but we've been going down into our records room. Anyone ever been down into the records room? One person. It's filled with papers. Giant Rolodex machines are about 12 feet tall. That you rotate them around and you can find a document. Maybe we were looking at a place of use map. It was 8 USGS maps that had been glued together on canvas, then folded up in a file for 50 years. When we opened it up, hand drawn, and then labels that had been glued on had all fallen off. And so you open it up, it was just a crease of little tags, and we'll never find those where they went again. So, investing in that is actually really important, and it will help that water availability too, because you'll have documents much more easy. You will link it to diversion data, and you'll be able to start to create models and tools that will actually get us what we need.
That's great. Paul, I'm going to go to you.
Yeah, and I think those are some real key things. And Graham had a real good point about where we're at now compared to we were a year ago. Remember last year at this time, we were staring down coming up the fourth driest year, and we're sitting on a dry period that hadn't been seen in 1,200 years. So we were kind of wondering what we're going to do during that drought. At the same time, we've been spending a lot of time with the state board, Fish and Wildlife, trying to help get these permits through. And at the time, even going back when I was with the county, we were really interested in having some flood mar operations, a lot of ephemeral streams that I viewed it as like we treat it as waste when there's high flows, trying to get it out to the Sac River and funnel it, but there was still sort of a lack of, as much as the streamlined process, people weren't jumping in. And we had a lot of discussions about that, about how to ramp that up. And then I think really one of the fortunate things, the governor's strategy last August on a hotter, drier California, that increased temperature that's going to, result in a 10% increased water demand needed to be made up. And so in that strategy, it called for state board working with DWR, CDFW, to almost set up a regulatory assistance process with permit applicants, where our technical staff would sit down with permit applicants up front and try to work through logistics on getting the permit as quickly as possible. And prior to the winter, things were really starting to move. So it was good. We were starting, and it was also identifying through that process where were the barriers, where were sort of the uncertainties that were precluding people from getting permits that we could fit into maybe some changes to the system. So that was going well, and then things just broke loose in January. So we had the executive order. Now we have trailer bill. So I think we are in a new, different world, and there's a lot more work ahead to really get the benefits of where we're going.
Great. Dawn, I'm going to go to you, and you're going to just wear both your hats. So, and I also want to encourage, if any of you want to comment on the other, or you have questions for the other, please go ahead and do that.
Well, so the California Food and Ag Department, as much as I wish they would have the authority to administer water rights, permitting, and endangered species, we know that that's not the case, and maybe for good reason. But we do deal with all of the issues at the CDFA. We have been known as the convener of all the issues, and we bring in very diverse groups, environmental groups, social justice, growers, and try to find solutions that we can pass recommendations on to the secretary and to the governor. That is our main purpose. And we have definitely dabbled in bringing together groups on with Floodmar, but the original one was a partnership between CDFA and DWR for the first Floodmar conference that we had several years back. So, I know that Secretary Ross is very interested in collaboration between agencies and really breaking down a lot of the barriers, the silos that have been there in the past. With my grower hat on, Erik, I definitely agree with you. I don't always agree with you, but I do on this case. The permitting process has been very difficult for agencies to acquire, to get the rights, to get the floodwater where it's needed. And I know you've told me that, and I've learned a lot of patience over the years in dealing with water.
I appreciate it, yeah.
But as we just spoke about, 4 floods in 20 years, and if we miss one of those, we're missing a tremendous opportunity to bring water on and start rebuilding our aquifers and preventing flooding downstream and really helping the environment. So I get impatient, and maybe it's because I'm getting a little older, and I know that I want to see these things happen, and I want to see them develop throughout California. I love it when I see other people get up and speak about Floodmar, Agmar, and just excited about where it has gone, and the solutions that it provides. I mean, we started before sustainable groundwater management, and we had the light go off. We partnered with Ashley's Group Sustainable Conservation early on, and we would have public meetings at our farm. And once Sigma became implemented, it was like the light came on. All of our neighbors realized how important and how critical this is to sustainable farming for the future. So it's been fun to watch the change and see the interest and see the state really focus on implementation. And Erik, I compliment you because the permitting process is getting better, but we'd always like to see it a little quicker. So.
If I can add in too, because I agree with all that, the state has, awarded out upwards of over $400 million the last 3 years to local agencies for Sigma implementation. A large portion of that, is for groundwater recharge, Floodmar, water bank development type thing. So aside from the other benefits, we're talking about expenditure of public funds to public agencies for the greater good of basins and communities. So we do have a vested interest in making sure these projects get going, rather than even beyond just good governance. So there is a high interest for us to actually have these funds be used and expended for what they were given out for. So.
No question, Paul, I agree. You guys have been great. We really appreciated the additional funding for operation of these floodmark projects earlier this year. I mean, the downstream benefit is tremendous. Mm-hmm. And to be honest with you, we were caught off guard. We thought we were going into another dry winter, mm-hmm. and we had put in some of the equipment last year, but we were caught off guard, and we ended up going out and renting over 30 heavy pumps because we knew floodwater would eventually come, but they essentially sat for a month and a half before we actually were able to use them. And that the only reason we did that was because we knew that equipment was going to be difficult to obtain, and it definitely became difficult. So
I think the state scooped up every compliant, airboard compliant pump that we could get, and Stephen will talk later about different things, and we were scooping what we could around the country. So
no question.
Yeah.
They were bringing them in from Arizona and elsewhere.
So, Floodmar really aspires to integrate water management, flood and groundwater management, floodplain restoration, all of these things. So integrated thinking and solutions like that definitely require collaboration across, all the partners here, but also the agencies. I imagine, or we all know, that can be difficult when an agency has a very specific mandate and focus. So can you all maybe speak a little bit about, we definitely saw you coming together and working, and I know we had hoped to have the Department of Fish and Wildlife here today, and unfortunately they couldn't join us, but you guys did work closely with the Department of Fish and Wildlife, so maybe you can just talk a little bit about how you have and how are you, what are the continuing challenges to work across your mandates in a more integrated fashion. And let's see, Paul, this time I'll start with you. Okay.
I always think about these things that different agencies have, even though you look at us as the state and we're kind of, cookie cutter out of that, but each agency has their own culture, their own language. And so a lot of this initially is just trying to make sure, we're translating and trying to, understand each other and our drivers. And so that's taken a lot of work about the fish considerations, water rights, water quality, the whole gambit trying to get there. So it's been, I think, over the past year, a huge leap in understanding each other and that trust about trying to work through things. But, I think also there's a lot, and we can probably get into this later, a lot of coordination with local GSAs, flood managers, and growers about what the terms are, what the requirements are. And the other thing too, going into this, especially this year being so dramatically risky for flood, flood response is job one during these emergencies. And so we're entering into that world during the throes of an emergency. And if you've been in an emergency operations center, you can understand the challenges. I will say this is the 5th year anniversary of the campfire in Paradise. So entering in with sort of this flood diversion operation at the same time, this, immediacy to respond to flood, we had to orchestrate that carefully because you can't get in front of the agencies that are job one of protecting people, properties, and the environment. So, but I think that also coordination and understanding kind of opened up eyes on the flood side. So it was us internally in DWR, a different sort of lens that was different. But then I think there was some acknowledgement too with all these diversions. It's hard to predict what didn't happen, but it did relieve over 100,000 acre feet pressure off of levees, creeks, and streams. Did that prevent a blowout downstream? Maybe it was kind of a good reduction. So those are kind of the, I think, intricacies we have that just really ramped up this past year.
Great, thank you, Erik.
Yeah, I want to go back to the water supply strategy that Paul talked about a bit earlier, and just put that in a little bit of historical context. When that came out, we were still in the midst of a severe drought. And to have a whole section focused on groundwater recharge, does illustrate, I think, that state agencies and many agencies have been thinking about the topic for a long time and actively kind of trying to do that integration that we're talking about. And so in the supply strategy, it talks about the board working with DWR serving as kind of a technical convener and technical assistance for potential applicants, helping them navigate through the application process. And again, that was all in place before we had any inkling that it was going to be the year that we had. And it worked really well, fantastically well. And we got, I think, 9 or 10 permits out in under a 3-month time period. These are all temporary permits. You add in a TUCP or urgency change petition with reclamation, we permitted 1.2 million acre feet of potential recharge in a 3-month time period. A lot of that was with the assistance of others kind of helping guide that process. So what did we learn from that? Well, the process is pretty hard and requires some technical assistance. And I think we'll talk more about state funding later on. But that integration and that collaboration is absolutely critical to making the whole process work. And I think last year it illustrated that the planning that we did, it was great. We actually got to trial it out, test it out, and we've learned what potentially could work better, what little additional help would be needed. And I think we saw some of that come through in that trailer bill as a result. So a lot of ongoing integration, certainly more local, and I think we'll talk more about the EO in a little bit too, but really great work that was done and provides a template, I think, for how we can continue to do so.
And Don, you want to chime in
Sure.
on this?
Yeah, I agree with Paul. There's been a lot of money that has gone to GSAs and a lot of money for infrastructure over the last few years, and hopefully more to come. I know the state's facing a tough budget this coming year. There's going to be cuts. There's not going to be the money that's been available in the past, and that's unfortunate, but that's the reality. I think what we need to look forward to is getting infrastructure in place, large scale, that can take this water when it is available. I think we heard in the past, we always looked at the floods as being something we want to get rid of. And we all know that the philosophy on that has definitely changed to where this water needs to be captured. It needs to be moved in for many reasons, like say environmental or property damage and lives downstream, but really for resilience of the whole state, because this doesn't just affect farmers. This is a community water system. We've got wells going dry throughout the San Joaquin Valley, domestic wells, and they're being addressed through SGMA. But when we have an opportunity to capture and get this water underground, I think we need to have the infrastructure ready. We need to have the permitting in place. We need to know, we need certainty. You need certainty if you're going to put this kind of money into projects. And that's where I look at the State Water Board for hoping to give us the certainty long-term for agencies throughout the San Joaquin Valley and throughout California to be able to be ready when these floods do exist, know what the parameters are, know what the trigger points are, and know what each watershed is capable of producing and moving onto the land. So I just believe the certainty of having that, you're going to see a lot more adoption in the future, especially in areas that are critically overdrafted. They typically don't have the infrastructure in place because they haven't had the water. And those are the hot spots I see throughout California, to where we need really to get the certainty, move forward with the infrastructure, and be ready, have the permitting in place so where everybody knows what the rules are, so we can move this water and capture it.
Yeah, I think that is a really good point about the certainty and the rules, but I think we're also in a very anxious time, like you say. Everyone, because we probably only have 4 shots at this, and things need to happen now. And so thinking about where we started with general policy a year ago, which was a board policy on you could divert high flood flows without a permit. It's not a water right, and you could incidentally recharge. And no one, it was kind of good. Some people used it, but it really wasn't certain to people as that how that works. Then the floods, and then the governor issued an executive order that really clarified that, dealt with some lands that could affect water quality and that sort. And so that gave a higher level, and Don can attest, a lot of level of certainty for GSAs and landowners out there about how to do this, as well as we're in a flood thing. So that refined certainty, and then it turned into trailer bill language. And that's sort of, kind of a good certainty when you have a statute. Going from a policy a year ago, now we have statutory language. It was a huge leap forward in certainty, but there's a lot more that needs to be done in terms of water quality, some of the definitions and criteria in SB 122 and others, because for both the people who are going to participate and those who are concerned about this just, we just go willy-nilly and just throw all caution to the wind and do things and cause harm, there needs to be some certainty for the long haul. And that's sort of the next step we get to. And that's why I'm circling back to the anxiety. That takes time. We've made a lot of leaps, and there's going to be probably a lot more movement ahead this year, but there's that anxiety that we need those answers right now. So, and they're pretty complex. So I just wanted to throw that out.